now talk about a very aspirational industry. And that industry is, of course, tech. And apparently, tech this month, and of course, indeed, even earlier, we've had a tech meltdown. And on November 18th, CNBC had a headline which caught my eye. And the headline was, "A year out from NASDAQ's peak, it's been brutal for tech stocks and the pain's not over." Mm-hmm. If that was not enough, earlier in the month, Facebook, in fact, Mark Zuckerberg, very charmingly sent a letter on November 9th to his Meta employees. So it's Meta, not Facebook. And he said, "Today I'm sharing some of the most difficult challenges we've made in Meta's history. I've decided to reduce the size of our team by about 13% and let more than 11,000 of our talented employees go. We are also taking a number of additional steps to become a leaner and more efficient company by cutting discretionary spending and extending our hiring freeze through Q1. Now, I could go on and read this letter and give you very many data points. But what has happened is tech, an industry that began with that became identified with this grandiose claim, "do no evil," is now in trouble. And the crypto space is perhaps more in trouble than anyone else. FTX apparently,
as all Ponzi schemes ultimately come to.
Yes, FTX owes more than $3 billion to its largest creditors, according to a court hearing on the crypto exchange. According to a list compiled for a court hearing on the crypto exchange bankruptcy. And apparently a large chunk of his assets are either missing or stolen. And the lawyer who was speaking to the Financial Times described the firm as the personal fiefdom of Sam Bankman-Fried, one of the founders.
A man who's never read a book.
And that it was that it was run by inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals. So,
a man who's never read a book.
Yes, and he's never read a book. So, Glenn, over to you. I mean, this is now, we are dealing not with China, not with Qatar, we're dealing with America and Silicon Valley and the great and mighty, the tech titans. So what is happening to tech?
Well, I'm a poor one, probably one of the if not the last, I wouldn't say I'm the last, but I'm certainly not the first person one should talk to about the specific ins and outs and ups and downs of specific tech companies. However, I can speak about economic macro trends and issues. And I have felt with regard to FTX specifically, but to a broader point, like the boy standing in the crowd, seeing everyone applauding as the emperor goes by, when I look and I think that I'm looking at a naked man. And I think, well, okay, I must be wrong then. This seems to be the new thing. And what am I missing? Because I'm not
You need glasses, rose-tinted glasses.
That's what I need. But I pretty well am confident that I'm actually looking at a naked man. And that's specific with regard to blockchain and Bitcoin and FTX itself. However, the larger issue is what's happened to FTX, what's happening to tech companies, to Meta, which we all love. And really, I think that these are the most dynamic, hottest, and leading technologically companies and industry in the economies of the world, and so they will be the most immediately, often the most immediately or powerfully affected in an economic downturn. We've spoken, you and I, for a long time, that it seemed pretty classic economics that if you raise interest rates, have pressure on supply and the strong demand, that inflation will rise, and the next classically economic step, is that as inflation rises, interest rates rise, and as interest rates rise, the economy will be pushed towards recession. Now, there are different levels of it. The United States seems to be ahead on the inflationary curve, and also having a softer arc in the recessionary or employment curve than Europe. Um, I'm not certain where China sits, and China has more radical variables because of the COVID restrictions and because of the demonstrations or the unrest and so on affecting economic output. But all of this would indicate that we're likely to have a recession. It's known that when one raises interest rates, it depends on which interest rates. It takes from 6 months for the shorter term rates to 18 months for the more fundamental rates of the Fed or European Central Bank to affect economic activity, and that leads us to 2023 when these things would play out. And I think businessmen know business cycles as well as anybody, and they deal with the pressures and have to solve them every quarter. And so I think what we're seeing with FTX and with the tech bubble, with Meta, are the signs of at least recessionary pressures, if not slipping into a broader economic recession.
I think I'll go specifically into tech because we've had lots of inputs from friends who want to stay off the record, who work in these big companies. And for instance, one of the things that many Googlers have talked over the years is that the company experienced bloat. And one of them said, quote, "Too many employees doing very little, being paid too much." I said, "What is the problem?" And I won't say whether it was a he or a she or a they, or actually it was many such employees who said that there were too many people of not much talent who had gone to the right schools, gamed the entrance to the company, and moved up by pleasing their bosses. Nothing new. All big organizations go through this. But if you are hiring people at ridiculous salaries, 300K, 400K, and every year you are paying them more, and that you're doing that because you went through the feast. You went through a period of extraordinary rapid growth, high earnings, and so you could just spend as if there was no tomorrow. Lots of young people wanted to go and work for tech because of fancy offices, free food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, smoothies, massages, swimming pools, the whole shebang. And I've seen many of these offices. I personally have been invited to lunch and dinner at Google, at Facebook, and it was almost as if you were in Disneyland. But that was predicated on the music playing, and the music has stopped. And bloat also happened because these companies became too big. They lost focus. Facebook bought Instagram for a staggering sum. It bought WhatsApp for a staggering sum. Then they started spending on augmented reality. They also tried Libra, a currency based on blockchain. And the CEOs developed an imperial syndrome. For instance, Mark Zuckerberg, and I have a big article on Mark Zuckerberg on Fair Observer. It was very well documented to have a fixation with Augustus, and to the extent that he even named his daughter Augusta. And he sees himself as an Augustus, which is slightly ridiculous, but hey ho, there we go, c'est la vie. And what has happened to tech is this is this extraordinary hubris of some of the tech CEOs. Of course, Elon Musk is sorting out Twitter now, and he's tweeting all sorts of wonderful things. He's already done great things with SpaceX and Tesla, and he has been a good CEO for all his personal foibles. And I believe, Glenn, you have a Tesla, or your wife has a Tesla, and you're quite happy with it. So it's clear he's led the company to great heights. But it is also true that suddenly now he's running 3 different companies, all separate from each other. And there has been bit by bit a loss of focus on the part of the tech CEOs. Companies now are conglomerates. There has been a lot of feasting. And as The Economist wrote in June, and I came across it, after the feast comes the fast or the famine. And that is what is happening, because what was going on was clearly unsustainable. It was like the tech bubble of
It's identical.
Yeah, pre-2001.
It's identical. It's classic.
Except there are bigger giants now. That's the thing.
Yeah, classic business cycle trend, evolution. I don't. It's terrible for people losing their jobs, and will have ramifications. Has ramifications for GDP growth, therefore overall employment and wealth. I mean, I'm not dismissing the significance of the events of an economic downturn, but these are the leading edges of the leading economies, and so they will be the ones to suffer the most immediate and probably consequential effects of a downturn. The Bitcoin part is fundamentally a tulip bubble from the 17th century in the 21st. I mean, it's the latest thing. A lot of money going after a lot of talk, and the value added is just about zero in economic, productive, substantive terms. The other tech industry, which makes it possible for all of us to speak, virtually now, provides a real value added, but since it's the leading edge, also will suffer. I don't see this as a particular foolishness on the part of specific leaders like Zuckerberg, although he might be a fool. But
I think he's a smart chap. I think.
Yeah, clearly smart.
I think all of them are clearly. They may be ruthless. They may not be the finest human beings on the planet, and they may not be people you want to have a beer with, but they are clearly good CEOs who
they have no more
companies.
Yeah, they have no more insights into the functioning of the economic cycle than people in the steel industry did 50 years ago, and they have the same blind spots and the same aspirations and the same pressures on them, just changing the specific elements of the industry, and the cycle is largely playing out the same way it has for all of human history. I don't see it as in the macro sense avoidable, although one could have been wise enough to realize that Bitcoin was a Ponzi scheme, really, based upon one novel important technology, which is the anonymity provided, or the security provided by blockchain. And after that, silence.
Yeah, but to get to the tech bubble, and of course now the bloodbath, perhaps none of it was avoidable, but it was all very predictable, because there was the same hubris that we saw during the financial bubble, same hubris that I heard from my own, in those days, flatmate, Satya Patel, who who was in finance and said, all the cleverest people go into finance. And I thought, hang on a minute. That's simply not true, because some of the cleverest people I knew at Oxford had become surgeons or mathematicians or physicists, or actually gone on to write books or start companies. But this hubris that I heard before, and he, of course, is American, so, and now, of course, he's in finance, he's running a fund, but that hubris I heard not just from him, but from so many others who would say similar stuff in the city of London. And you heard that again and again, and we are registered in Mountain View. So I taught as a lecturer in Berkeley for a couple of years. And when you heard that again and again from tech people, that, oh, all the smartest people are in tech, they are the innovators, and the others, of course, you and me are fuddy-duddies. We should be in the British Museum as mummies. We have nothing new to contribute to the world. And I remember meeting a tech CEO who said something extraordinarily insightful. I asked him if he read the news, and he said, oh, of course not, because it makes me feel badly. So it's much better that I meditate, because the better I feel, the more productive I am, the better my company does. And this close-mindedness, and a late friend of mine who tragically died in a skiing accident, who was in Silicon Valley, and he said, and I have written it down in my diary, he said something very, very profound. He said that Silicon Valley is the most close-minded place in the world that professes to be open-minded. Obviously not everyone is like that. Obviously, there are people who have a broader understanding of the world. Many friends work for each of these big companies, and they are different. But there is indeed that sort of hubris, there is that sort of narrow-mindedness, there is this belief that the laws of gravity don't apply to us. This time it's different. And yes,
Right.
Indeed, they have changed the world. We are speaking thanks to the technology they've created. We use calendar invites. Modern life today functions off the laptop, and many of the things built off the internet, the browser and apps and smartphones and whatnot. But at the same time, the economic cycles affect them all, affect us all, and they are no exception.
Yeah, no exception. I recall in the late 80s taking a train ride in Europe, and I was sitting beside someone I didn't know. I mean, this happens in trains. He was a businessman from the US, and this was the decade of Japan's supremacy. And Japan was touted as the new model. They had figured out economic processes and that would leave traditional capitalism behind, and the United States was yesterday's news, and so on. And that lasted for another several years. And to challenge that would make you would be characterized as a fuddy-duddy, which gets to your point about Silicon Valley. Whenever there is expertise and success in some domain, there develops an orthodoxy, because look, we succeeded, so we're right. And if you challenge that, then clearly you cannot be right, and so you're an apostate. I experienced this painfully with regard to terrorism and the nature of the jihadist threat. And I was viewed, because I was, by my terrorism expert colleagues as an outsider. And so therefore, I should defer to the experts. But insight and advance comes from people who are generally knowledgeable about a field, but who have not been defined by and limited by the orthodoxy. Now, this is true with regard to an economic sector or a technological one, both overlapping in the case of Silicon Valley and the tech issue here. So what's the solution? And the solution is that you can't avoid or change human nature. You can't avoid the pressures of on businesses to grow and to extend themselves probably too far, or of human nature to believe that success proves expertise and insight when it doesn't necessarily. The solution to that is you regulate from outside. That was the triumph, really, the great lesson learned from the Depression and the stock market crash in 1929, and then the 30s, much of which has been undone since the early 1980s. And perhaps the lessons need to be learned, I would argue they do, again. But you can't change the economic cycle, but you could mitigate the consequences, which gets to Bitcoin or Twitter, which have argued for the entire lack of control as the way to success. And I think that proves, I think their history and the issues that they create, whether social with regard to Twitter or economic with regard to the tech crash, prove the contrary. But that's where we are.
Good. You're echoing Tim Wu, who has championed competition policy, and he points out that a lot of these mergers should never been allowed to happen. Facebook buying Instagram and Facebook buying WhatsApp, and this merging of all these different industries that has happened in the US, from banking to mining to almost every sector. And he is talking about bringing back Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting days. Mm-hmm. So it's not just regulation, it's more than that. Sometimes certain things are too big and they have to be broken down. And we have an aspiring congressman tuning in to listen to us, and we hope he's taking heed of our evocation of our remembrance of Teddy Roosevelt. Maybe he will be the Teddy Roosevelt or the next Teddy Roosevelt of America, and be the trust-busting leader America needs.
Roosevelt's one of my heroes. I have a signed autograph of him on my wall from my great-grandfather, who was a Republican official in Massachusetts, and I have a campaign pennant from Teddy Roosevelt's presidential campaign on my wall also. The trust buster is, he realized that to continue becoming stronger, you had to regulate.
Brilliant. So there we go. On that happy note, we've come to the end of our time. Peter Isaacson, our Chief Strategy Officer, quips that the idea that one must study coding to thrive might take a bit of a knock with 13,000 people fired from Facebook. So we now live not in a brave new world, but a brave new world. And on that note, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you next month. And since next month will be the last month of the year, we wish you Merry Christmas before we see you next.
I think the lesson from Peter and me is everyone needs to read books.
Read Homer and
yes.
the Mahabharata, the longest, the most complex, and the most interesting epic in the world. On that note, cheerio.
Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.